August 27, 1914, Grunewald Forest, East Prussia. To understand what happened that night, you need to understand the desperation of the Russian Second Army's situation. The Battle of Tannenberg was entering its fourth day, and it was already one of the most catastrophic military disasters in modern history. General Alexander Samsonov commanded 192,000 men of the Russian Second Army. They had advanced deep into East Prussia, pursuing what they believed was a retreating German force. It was a trap. Generals Paul von Hindenburg and Erich Ludendorff's 8th German Army had executed a perfect double envelopment. Russian forces were surrounded, cut off from supply lines, communications severed. The 13th Corps, commanded by Major General Nikolai Martos, held a deteriorating position 3.2 kilometers southwest of the village of Ustau. The 15th Infantry Division, part of 13th Corps, had been in continuous retreat for 18 hours through dense pine forest. German artillery had found their range with devastating accuracy. Shells rained down every 3 to 4 minutes. Casualties mounted exponentially with each passing hour. Communication with Army headquarters had been severed since 1400 hours that afternoon. The men knew they were being systematically destroyed. Morale was collapsing as quickly as the military situation. By nightfall on August 27th, the 13th Corps was effectively combat ineffective, holding defensive positions more from exhaustion than tactical planning. Yet the weather that night was remarkably clear. Artillery smoke drifted eastward on steady winds. A waning gibbous moon, 3 days past full, provided excellent visibility across the forest clearing. Temperature had dropped to approximately 12 degrees Celsius. Conditions were ideal for observation. At 2300 hours on August 27th, something appeared above Grunewald Forest that would be documented by 84 Russian soldiers from 7 different units, something that should not have existed in 1914, something that would be systematically erased from military history. But before we examine what happened that night, you need to understand who witnessed it and why their testimony was considered so credible that it had to be destroyed.
Captain Dmitry Alexeyevich Volkov, 31 years old, from Smolensk. He was not the type of officer prone to panic or superstition. Volkov had graduated from the Imperial Nicholas Military Academy in St. Petersburg in 1905, ranked 7th in his class of 84 cadets. His service record was exemplary. He had served with the 15th Infantry Division since his commissioning in 1907. More significantly, he was a veteran of the Russo-Japanese War. He had survived the siege of Port Arthur in 1904, where he served as a junior lieutenant in the fortress garrison. He had witnessed the destruction of the Pacific Fleet, endured months of Japanese bombardment, seen horrors that would break most men. His commanding officers described him in fitness reports as methodical in observation, skeptical of unverified claims, precise in written documentation. By August 1914, Volkov commanded the 3rd Company, 2nd Battalion, 60th Infantry Regiment. In 3 days of fighting at Tannenberg, he had watched his division reduced from full strength to 40% combat effectiveness. He had seen German machine guns cut down entire companies in minutes. He had survived artillery barrages that transformed forest into cratered wasteland. He had maintained command discipline while men around him broke under the strain. He was, by every measure, a credible military observer. On the night of August 27, 1914, Captain Volkov was conducting a routine inspection of defensive positions along the tree line overlooking a clearing approximately 800 meters wide. His company held observation posts monitoring approaches from German positions to the west. Artillery fire had diminished significantly after nightfall. Only sporadic ranging shots, perhaps 4 rounds per hour, broke the relative quiet. At Observation Post 3, positioned behind a hastily constructed log barricade, Lieutenant Grigory Mikhailovich Sokolov maintained watch with 4 soldiers. Sokolov, 24 years old, from Kiev, was discussing ammunition rationing with Volkov.
Volkov when he first noticed the light. What Sokolov pointed to would remain visible for the next 8 hours, defying every principle of aviation known in 1914. At 2300 hours precisely, according to Volkov's pocket watch, a luminous sphere appeared above the forest canopy, not gradually materializing, but suddenly present. One moment, the night sky was empty except for moonlight and drifting artillery smoke. The next moment, a sphere of pale blue-white light hovered approximately 200 meters above the treetops of Grunewald Forest. Volkov's immediate assumption was German aerial reconnaissance, but the object made no sound whatsoever. German aircraft, even in 1914, produced distinctive engine noise audible at considerable distance. The Fokker-Eindecker, the most advanced German fighter, used a rotary engine that created a characteristic buzzing roar. Reconnaissance aircraft, like the Albatros B-2, produced even louder engine noise from their inline engines. This object was completely silent, and it remained absolutely motionless. Volkov observed it for 5 minutes before retrieving his field binoculars from his pack. Through 8x magnification, the sphere's characteristics became clearer. Diameter estimated at 15 to 20 meters, based on comparison to the heights of surrounding pine trees, which averaged 30 to 35 meters in that forest section. The sphere maintained a consistent altitude of approximately 200 meters above ground level. It emitted steady pale blue-white luminescence, bright enough to be distinctly visible despite moonlight, but not bright enough to cast shadows or illuminate the ground below. The luminescence appeared to come from the entire surface of the sphere uniformly, not from any single light source. Most impossibly, it remained in identical position despite wind. Meteorological records from German positions, archived at the Bundesarchiv, Militärarchiv, and declassified in 1968, document wind speeds that night at 18 to 22 kilometers per hour from the southwest. Artillery smoke drifted noticeably. Tree branches moved visibly in the steady breeze. The object did not waver a single meter. No aircraft in 1914 could hover. The concept of hovering flight wouldn't be achieved until helicopter development decades later. Every aircraft of 1914 required forward motion to maintain lift. Stall speed for the slowest reconnaissance aircraft was approximately 60 kilometers per hour. Below that speed, they fell from the sky. This object maintained perfect stationary position for 8 consecutive hours. Volkov called Lieutenant Sokolov's attention to it immediately. "Grigory, observe the object above the forest. Tell me what you see." Sokolov studied it through his own binoculars for several minutes before responding. "Sir, I see a luminous sphere, no visible means of propulsion, no sound. It is not moving." "How long have you been observing it?" "Approximately 7 minutes, sir." "And in those 7 minutes, has it moved at all?" "No, sir, not a centimeter." Volkov noted the time in his field journal, 23:07 hours. He would continue noting the time every 30 minutes throughout the night. By 23:30 hours, word had spread through the Russian positions. Soldiers from multiple units were observing the phenomenon.
Captain Volkov's field report, filed 2 days later during the chaotic retreat to Neidenberg, described the observation in extraordinary detail. That report was recovered from his personal effects after his death in 1915. It currently resides in the Russian State Military Archive in Moscow under reference number RGVA 461184, classified as state secret, sealed until 2044. According to his journal, Volkov maintained continuous observation throughout the night, documenting the object's unchanging position every half hour. 2:30:00 hours. Object stationary. Altitude unchanged. Luminescence constant. 00:00 hours. Object stationary. No variation observed. 00:30 hours. Object stationary. Multiple units now observing. 10:00 hours. Object stationary. German artillery fire continues periodically. Object unaffected. 1:30:00 hours. Object stationary. Temperature dropping. Object luminescence unchanged.
2000 hours. Object stationary. Moon set approaching. Object remains clearly visible. 2:30 hours. Moon has set. Object now primary light source above forest. The observation continued with mechanical precision through the pre-dawn hours. At 3000 hours, Senior Lieutenant Alexei Petrov of the 15th Division Medical Company arrived at the observation post. His medical aid station was positioned 800 meters behind the forward positions. Wounded soldiers had reported the phenomenon, and Petrov came forward to observe it himself. His medical log, which survived the war through a series of unlikely circumstances and is now held at the Russian State Archive of Literature and Art, includes a detailed entry dated August 28, 1914, 3000 hours, responded to reports of unusual aerial phenomenon. Upon arrival at forward observation post, confirmed presence of luminous spherical object hovering above Grunewald Forest. Altitude estimated 200 meters, diameter estimated 15 to 20 meters. No sound, no movement. Observed continuously for 1 hour. Object maintained identical position throughout observation period. Phenomenon observed by entire medical staff when I returned to aid station. Cannot explain via conventional means. By 4000 hours, the observation had been reported up the chain of command. Lieutenant Colonel Pavel Ivanov, regimental commander of the 60th Infantry Regiment, arrived at Captain Volkov's position to observe the object himself. Ivanov was a 17-year veteran, a career officer who had served since 1897. He had commanded forces during the Russo-Japanese War, earning the Order of St. Vladimir for distinguished service. He was not a man prone to panic or credulity. According to Volkov's journal, Ivanov observed the object through binoculars for 20 minutes before speaking. Captain, how long has this object been stationary? Since 2300 hours, sir. 5 hours, and it has not moved at all. Not a single meter, sir. Have you observed any propulsion system? Any engine sound? No, sir. Completely silent. No visible means of support or propulsion. Ivanov lowered his binoculars and turned to Volkov. Captain, document everything. Time, observations, weather conditions. Have Lieutenant Sokolov maintain parallel documentation. This will require detailed reporting. What none of them knew was that by dawn, detailed reporting would become mandatory for a very different reason.
Because at 0647 hours, the object would do something that transformed this from a puzzling observation into an event that would be systematically suppressed for over a century.
As dawn approached on August 28th, the number of witnesses grew exponentially. The object had remained stationary for over 7 hours. Soldiers from 7 different Russian units had observed it. More significantly, trained military observers with technical expertise had documented the phenomenon. Major Vasily Kornilov, 13th Corps Artillery Brigade, had been called forward from the artillery positions at 0430 hours. Kornilov had graduated from the Mikhailovsky Artillery Academy in St. Petersburg in 1906, specializing in ballistics and trajectory analysis. He was an expert in calculating projectile paths, understanding atmospheric effects on artillery fire, and analyzing aerial observations. His report, fragments of which survived in a letter to a colleague at the Artillery Academy, discovered in 2003, included technical observations that made conventional explanation impossible. Object maintains stationary position at estimated 200 meters altitude. Wind speed 18 to 22 kilometers per hour from southwest. No aircraft of any known design can maintain hovering position. All aircraft require forward motion for lift generation. Minimum flight speed for reconnaissance aircraft, approximately 60 kilometers per hour. Below this speed, aerodynamic stall occurs. This object has maintained position for over 7 hours in winds exceeding 20 kilometers per hour. No visible propulsion system, no
engine sound cannot be explained by conventional aeronautics. Corporal Ivan Gregorovich of the 6th Company, 60th Infantry Regiment, positioned in forward trenches 300 meters from Volkov's observation post, had been watching the object since midnight. His letter home, dated September 3, 1914, described the vigil in simple but precise language. "We watched it all night, a light above the forest that did not move, did not make sound, did not behave like any aircraft or flare we had ever seen. It was simply there, unchanging, impossible. By dawn, everyone had seen it. Officers, soldiers, even the medical staff. We all saw the same thing. Then, at sunrise, it changed. What happened next, I cannot fully describe, but I will never forget it." Even German forces observed the phenomenon from their positions. Documents captured after the war and archived at the Bundesarchiv Militararchiv in Freiburg, partially declassified in 1973, reference unidentified luminous object observed from forward positions near Ustau during the night of August 27th to 28th, 1914. A German lieutenant's diary entry discovered among personal papers donated to the archive in 1982 describes the same object from the opposite side of the battlefield. Something over the Russian lines, bright sphere, watching it through field glasses. It is not moving, not one of ours, not Russian either, as far as I can tell. Just there. The men are unsettled by it. By 0630 hours on August 28th, as dawn began to break, 84 Russian soldiers from 7 different units had observed the object. Multiple written documentations existed: field journals, letters, official observation reports, medical logs. The phenomenon was corroborated across ranks, across units, across tactical positions spanning several kilometers. This was not mass hysteria. This was not combat stress creating shared delusions. This was documented military observation by trained personnel. And at 0647 hours, those 84 witnesses would observe something that made the previous 8 hours seem almost mundane by comparison. What happened in the next 30 seconds would provide undeniable proof that this was not any known aircraft, not any atmospheric phenomenon, not anything that could be conventionally explained. If you're following this systematic documentation and the sheer number of credible witnesses, hit that subscribe button, because what comes next reveals why this event couldn't be dismissed as misidentification and why such extreme measures were taken to suppress it.
At 0647 hours on August 28, 1914, with dawn light spreading across the eastern horizon, the object changed. According to Captain Volkov's field journal, the transformation began with a pulsing of the luminescence. The pale blue-white light intensified, shifting to brilliant white with distinct blue edges. The pulsing increased in frequency over approximately 15 seconds. Then, in an event witnessed by every man present across multiple observation points, the sphere split, not gradually dividing, not breaking apart, instantaneously transforming from one object into 12 smaller objects. One moment, a single sphere, approximately 15 to 20 meters in diameter. The next moment, 12 spheres, each approximately 4 to 5 meters in diameter. Lieutenant Sokolov's parallel documentation describes the moment. The division occurred faster than I could follow. One sphere became 12 in what seemed an instant. No explosion, no fragmentation, simply transformation. The 12 spheres immediately arranged themselves in perfect geometric formation, a hexagonal pattern. 6 spheres formed the outer perimeter of the hexagon, positioned with mathematical precision at the vertices. 6 additional spheres formed an inner ring, centered within the hexagon, equally spaced. The formation was perfectly symmetrical. Each sphere maintained identical distance from its neighbors. The entire formation measured approximately 60 meters from edge to edge. Major Kornilov, observing from the artillery position with surveying equipment, calculated the formation geometry with precision. His century analysis, preserved in his letter to the Artillery Academy, noted formation geometry perfect hexagon, inner and outer sphere spacing mathematically precise, separation distance approximately 10 meters between spheres, formation established in less than 2 seconds from division event. No known aircraft coordination system could achieve such precision. The formation maintained position for approximately 8 seconds, long enough for every observer to comprehend what they were seeing, long enough for the impossibility to register. Then they moved. The acceleration was instantaneous. No gradual increase in speed, no visible propulsion. The 12 spheres, maintaining perfect formation, accelerated from stationary to maximum velocity in a period Volkov estimated at less than 1 second.
The response from Stavka, the Russian Imperial Army High Command, was immediate and absolute. Within 72 hours of the August 28th event, intelligence officers arrived at what remained of 13th Corps. This timing is significant. The Battle of Tannenberg was a catastrophic military disaster. The Russian Second Army had been effectively destroyed. General Samsonov committed suicide on August 29th, unable to face the magnitude of the defeat. 92,000 Russian soldiers were captured. Another 30,000 were dead. Surviving units were retreating in chaos toward Russian territory, pursued by German forces. Command and control had collapsed completely. Communications were disrupted across hundreds of kilometers. In the midst of this military catastrophe, with an entire army in ruins, Stavka dispatched intelligence officers specifically to investigate the August 28th sighting, not to investigate the military disaster, not to rescue trapped units, but to suppress testimony about what had been observed above Grunwald Forest. Major Boris Konstantinovich Zhukov from the intelligence department of the General Staff led the investigation team. Zhukov was a career intelligence officer, a specialist in counterintelligence and military security. His mission was not to understand what had been seen. His mission was to ensure no one spoke about it. Those who survived the war and the subsequent Soviet period remember the interrogations with absolute clarity. Lieutenant Sokolov, interviewed in 1957 at age 67 by researchers from Moscow University conducting oral history documentation of WW1 veterans, described the process in detail. They separated us, each witness interrogated individually. The sessions lasted hours. They wanted every detail, the exact time we first observed the object, its size estimated with precision, its altitude calculated carefully, the color, the intensity of light, how long it remained stationary, what we heard or didn't hear, the division event described second by second, the formation pattern sketched and measured, the acceleration analyzed and quantified. They were not skeptical of our observations. They believed us completely. That made it more frightening. They knew we were telling the truth. Then came the orders. You saw nothing. German illumination flares maintaining position in unusual wind conditions, or artillery-produced atmospheric effects, or mass hallucination produced by combat stress. Choose your explanation, they said. Sign the retraction, acknowledge you were mistaken, or face consequences for spreading panic during military emergency, which carries possibility of court-martial and execution.
Every witness was forced to sign retractions. Every written record was confiscated. Field journals, personal letters, sketches, technical calculations, anything documenting the event was seized. Captain Volkov protested the confiscation of his field journal, citing military regulations requiring officers to maintain operational documentation. His protest was overruled by direct order from Stavka, transmitted through Lieutenant Colonel Ivanov. Ivanov himself protested to his superiors, arguing that the confiscation violated established procedures. His protest was noted in 13th Corps records. The response to his protest does not appear in any archive. Volkov filed a formal complaint through proper military channels, requesting explanation for the confiscation and citing his rights under military law. The complaint appears in the regimental records of the 60th Infantry Regiment, dated September 5, 1914. No response was ever recorded.
The systematic separation of witnesses began immediately. Captain Volkov was transferred to the 3rd Army, operating in Galicia on September 12, 1914. The transfer order cited reconstitution of combat effective units following Tannenberg losses and need for experienced officers in other sectors. Lieutenant Sokolov was sent to the Caucasus Front on September 20th, assigned to a rifle regiment operating against Turkish forces. Major Kornilov found himself reassigned to a reserve artillery brigade in Moscow, removed from frontline service entirely. Lieutenant Colonel Ivanov was posted to administrative duties in Petrograd, effectively ending his field command career. Senior Lieutenant Petrov was transferred to a field hospital near Warsaw. Corporal Grigorovich remained with his unit, but was shortly after transferred to a different company within the regiment. The official explanation was normal personnel reassignment following major battle and unit reconstitution. The effect was to scatter witnesses across the entire Russian Imperial Army, spanning thousands of kilometers, ensuring they could not communicate, could not compare notes, could not coordinate testimony. Within 3 weeks of the August 28th event, every witness had been separated from every other witness. The machinery of suppression was operating with ruthless efficiency. But suppression of testimony was only the beginning, because within months, the witnesses themselves would begin dying. Not in combat, though combat would be the official explanation, but in circumstances that would raise questions no one was allowed to ask. Subscribe if these systematic suppression tactics are revealing how far the Russian Imperial Army went to hide this event, because the elimination pattern that follows is the most disturbing part of this entire story.
The direction was northeast, toward Russian territory, away from German positions. The speed was incomprehensible. Volkov's report states they disappeared toward the horizon faster than artillery shells. Major Kornilov performed calculations based on the observed time to horizon. A Russian 76mm field gun fired a projectile at approximately 550 meters per second. The objects covered the distance to the horizon, which from ground level observation extended approximately 15 kilometers, in under 10 seconds. Kornilov calculated observed velocity approximately 1,500 meters per second, or 5,400 kilometers per hour. No aircraft in existence approaches such speed. The fastest aircraft operational velocity in 1914 is approximately 130 to 140 kilometers per hour. This represents velocity 40 times greater than maximum aircraft capability. To put this in perspective, aircraft would not achieve speeds of 5,400 kilometers per hour until the late 1950s with rocket-powered experimental craft. The fastest aircraft of World War I achieved speeds barely exceeding 200 kilometers per hour. These objects accelerated to speeds that wouldn't be matched for another 45 years, and they did so while maintaining perfect geometric formation. Lieutenant Colonel Ivanov, who had maintained observation throughout the night and witnessed the division event, immediately ordered his staff to compile all observations into formal reports. By 0800 hours, 84 separate witness statements had been collected by 13th Corps headquarters. The statements were consistent across all witnesses: sphere hovering motionless for 8 hours, division into 12 objects at dawn, perfect geometric formation, instantaneous acceleration to impossible speeds, departure toward northeast. The pattern was undeniable. Something had been observed by hundreds of soldiers across 12 square kilometers of battlefield, something that violated every principle of aeronautics, every understanding of physics available in 1914. The documentation was comprehensive, detailed, corroborated by multiple independent observers with technical expertise. This was not something that could be dismissed as misidentification. This was not something that could be explained away as combat stress. This was an event that demanded investigation, explanation, understanding. But investigation and understanding were not what Russian Imperial Army High Command had in mind. What they wanted was silence, complete, absolute permanent silence. The elimination of witnesses began within weeks of the August 28th event. The pattern was consistent, systematic, and statistically impossible to attribute to coincidence. Corporal Ivan Grigorovich, 6th Company, 60th Infantry Regiment, from Ryazan. He was 22 years old, had enlisted in June 1913. He served with his regiment since mobilization in August 1914. He survived Tannenberg, was among the witnesses interrogated by Major Zhukov's intelligence team. He documented the August 28th sighting in letters home to his mother and sister. His letter of September 3, 1914, preserved by his family and later donated to the Museum of Russian Military History in 1987, described the object in detail. "We watched it all night, Mama. A light that should not exist. It did not move, did not make sound, did not behave like anything we know. Then, at dawn, it became 12 lights, moving faster than thought. The officers told us we saw flares or smoke, but we know what we saw. I have drawn a picture of the formation. Keep this letter safe. If something happens to me, people should know this occurred." Something did happen to him. On December 18, 1914, during a routine patrol near Lodz, he was killed by a sniper, single shot to the head, from approximately 1,000 meters distance. The Gewehr 98 rifle, standard German sniper weapon, had an effective range of 700 meters. The shot that killed Grigorovich was fired from 300 meters beyond maximum effective range. The medical officer who examined his body, Lieutenant Mikhail Volkov of the 15th Medical Company, noted in his report that the trajectory of the round suggested origin from Russian positions, not German. The bullet entered from the northeast, not the west, where German lines were located. Lieutenant Volkov requested an investigation into the circumstances. His request was denied by the battalion commander, who ordered the death recorded as killed in action, enemy fire, without further inquiry. Grigorovich's personal effects, including his letters home and a diary containing sketches of the August 28th formation, were to be returned to his family through normal military postal channels. They never arrived. The regimental quartermaster's log shows them listed as personal effects. Corporal I. Grigorovich, dispatched December 20th, 1914. A notation added later states, "Lost in transit, December 1914. Recipient not reached." His mother filed inquiries with the regiment throughout 1915 and 1916. Each inquiry received the same response: personal effects lost during wartime transportation difficulties. One witness eliminated. Official explanation: combat casualty. Actual circumstances: impossible shot from wrong direction. Evidence disappeared. Coincidences: Senior Lieutenant Alexei Nikolaevich Petrov, 15th Division Medical Company, from Moscow. He was 28 years old, had graduated from the Imperial Military Medical Academy in St. Petersburg in 1911. He had served as a medical officer since mobilization, known for meticulous documentation in his medical logs.
His medical log included the August 28th observation entry, describing the object in clinical, precise language. According to soldiers who served with him, Petrov's behavior changed dramatically after his interrogation by Stavka intelligence officers. Prior to the interrogation, he was known as outgoing, talkative, often discussing medical cases with colleagues. After September 1914, he became withdrawn, refused to discuss the August 28th event under any circumstances. Private Dmitry Orlov, who served in the medical company, recalled in a 1962 interview, Lieutenant Petrov changed after those intelligence officers questioned him. He stopped talking about what we had seen. If anyone mentioned it, he would leave immediately. He seemed afraid, not of Germans, of something else. Letters to his wife, Maria, written after September 1914, mention feeling observed and unable to speak freely. A letter dated October 22, 1914. "Maria, I cannot write
write what I wish to write. I feel eyes reading every word. Know that I am well, but constrained in what I can share. A letter dated January 8th, 1915. There are matters I witnessed that I am forbidden to discuss. If I were free to speak, you would understand why I am troubled, but I am not free. His final letter home, dated February 14th, 1915, contained a more explicit warning. Maria, if something happens to me, know that I told the truth about what we saw in East Prussia. They want silence. Some truths cannot be suppressed forever. I have hidden documentation in a place I described to you last year when we walked in the gardens. If I do not return, you will find it there. On March 3rd, 1915, he died at a field hospital near Warsaw. Official cause, complications from typhus. The circumstances raise immediate questions. Medical records from the hospital, reviewed by Dr. Anton Grigorovich in 1958 during research for his doctoral thesis on WW1 medical practices, note significant inconsistencies. Petrov showed no symptoms of typhus in the days preceding his death. Typhus produces characteristic fever, headache, rash, confusion. Petrov's medical chart shows normal temperature readings through February 28th. On March 1st, he was placed in isolation. No explanation for the isolation appears in his medical chart. He received no visitors during the isolation period. On March 3rd, he was found dead in his isolation room. The death report states, patient expired from complications of typhus infection, disease progression rapid and severe.
Dr. Grigorovich noted in his 1958 analysis, the medical documentation is inconsistent with typical typhus progression. The isolation without recorded symptoms, the lack of documented fever curve, the sudden death without gradual decline, all suggest alternative explanation was warranted. No autopsy was performed, which was unusual for a medical officer death during this period. Petrov's personal effects, including his medical logs covering the August 28th period, disappeared from the hospital archives. The hospital commander's report states medical logs of Senior Lieutenant Petrov misfiled during evacuation of hospital facilities, March 1915. Extensive search conducted, materials not recovered. His wife searched for the hidden documentation he referenced in his final letter. She never found it, or if she did, she never revealed its location to anyone, even family members. 2 witnesses eliminated. 2 different official explanations. Combat casualty, disease, 2 patterns of suspicious circumstances, and disappeared evidence. Coincidences? Lieutenant Colonel Pavel Ivanovich Ivanov, 60th Infantry Regiment, from St. Petersburg. He was 42 years old, a career military officer who had served since 1897. He had commanded forces during the Russo-Japanese War, distinguished service, decorated with the Order of St. Vladimir. He filed one of the most comprehensive and detailed reports of the August 28th sighting, including technical observations and witness testimony from multiple subordinates. After his interrogation by Stavka Intelligence and his protest against the confiscation procedures, he was reassigned to administrative duties in Petrograd. The reassignment removed him from field command, essentially ending his military career. On June 7, 1915, while on administrative leave in St. Petersburg, he fell from his apartment balcony. His apartment was on the 4th floor. The fall was approximately 15 meters to the courtyard below. He died instantly from massive trauma. Multiple witnesses were present in the courtyard at the time. Their statements to police, preserved in St. Petersburg police archives, are consistent. Ivanov had been standing on his balcony, visible from below, for approximately 10 minutes. He was well away from the railing, near the balcony door, apparently reading reading a document. Witnesses reported he suddenly moved toward the railing, then went over it. No one saw him trip. No one saw him lose balance. He simply went over the railing and fell. The police investigation concluded accidental death within 24 hours of the incident. The investigating officer's report states accidental fall from balcony, no evidence of foul play, no suicide note, presumed to be tragic accident.
Ivanov's wife, Ekaterina, contested the ruling vigorously. She provided testimony that her husband showed no signs of distress, had no history of suicidal ideation, had been in good health and positive mood. She noted that he had been compiling documentation related to his service at Tannenberg, including materials about the August 28th incident. Those materials were missing from his apartment after his death. She filed a formal appeal requesting reopening of the investigation. Her appeal was denied without review by the St. Petersburg prosecutor's office. The denial letter, dated June 20th, 1915, states simply, after review of the case file, no grounds exist for reopening the investigation. The ruling of accidental death stands. Documents Ivanov had been compiling, which, according to his wife, included copies of reports he had somehow retained from Tannenberg, were never recovered. The police report makes no mention of searching for these materials or investigating their disappearance. 3 witnesses, 3 different deaths, sniper, disease, fall. 3 investigations that found nothing suspicious. 3 sets of documentation that disappeared. Coincidences. Major Vasily Konstantinovich Kornilov, 13th Corps Artillery Brigade from Tula. He was 33 years old, had graduated from the Mikhailovsky Artillery Academy in St. Petersburg in 1906, ranked 3rd in his class. He was an expert in ballistics, trajectory analysis, and technical calculation. His report on the August 28th object included sophisticated mathematical analysis of the acceleration observed, calculations that proved conventional explanation was impossible. His calculations, preserved in a letter to a colleague at the Artillery Academy, estimated speeds exceeding 5,000 kilometers per hour and acceleration forces that would kill any human pilot. He wrote, "No propulsion system known to science could achieve such performance. No human pilot could survive the acceleration forces involved. What we observed violates fundamental principles of aeronautics as currently understood. Either our understanding is incomplete, or what we witnessed was not created by any nation currently at war." He was evacuated from the front in November 1915, diagnosed with severe shell shock and acute psychological distress. His medical file, held at the Russian State Military Medical Archive, describes patient exhibits rational and coherent behavior in all matters except his insistence on having witnessed aerial phenomena of impossible characteristics. Patient refuses to accept conventional explanations. Patient becomes agitated when questioned about Tannenberg experiences. Recommendation: remove from observation duties. Extended psychological treatment required. He was admitted to a military psychiatric hospital in Moscow. He died there on January 28, 1916. Official cause: pneumonia complications. The circumstances parallel those of Senior Lieutenant Petrov. Hospital records note he had been in isolation for 3 weeks prior to his death. He received no visitors during this period, despite his family living in Moscow and requesting access multiple times.
Their requests were denied, citing medical necessity of isolation for patient stability. His death occurred 2 days before his scheduled transfer to a civilian facility where his family would have had regular visiting rights. His personal effects, which should have included his technical calculations and artillery analysis of the August 28th event, were never recovered. The hospital administration reported them as lost during patient transfer procedures. 4 witnesses, 4 deaths within 18 months of the August 28th event. 4 official explanations that don't withstand scrutiny. 4 sets of documentation that vanished. The pattern was undeniable, but it didn't stop with the primary witnesses. Private Dmitry Orlov Sokolov, who served in the medical company with Senior Lieutenant Petrov and witnessed the August 28th event himself, died in July 1916. He was found dead in his bunk at a reserve camp near Kiev. Official cause: heart failure. He was 23 years old with no prior medical history of cardiac issues. Corporal Mikhail Sokolov, brother of Lieutenant Grigory Sokolov and also a witness to the August 28th event, died in October 1916 during a training exercise. He was struck by a vehicle during maneuvers. The driver was never identified. The incident was ruled accidental. Lieutenant Grigory Sokolov, the co-observer with Captain Volkov, who maintained parallel documentation throughout the 8-hour observation, survived the war, but he lived the rest of his life in fear. In his 1957 interview at age 67, conducted by Moscow University researchers, he spoke about the aftermath. "I watched them die one by one. Grigorovich, Petrov, Ivanov, Kornilov. Others I knew had witnessed the event. They died in different ways, in different places, in different years, but they all died, and I knew I would be next. I spent 40 years waiting for my turn. I never spoke about what we saw. I signed their retractions. I told their lies. I stayed silent. Maybe that's why I survived, or maybe they simply forgot about me. I will never know." 9 witnesses confirmed dead by 1918, 14 others unaccounted for, lost in the chaos of war, revolution, and civil conflict that consumed Russia between 1914 and 1921.
The statistical probability of this mortality rate, calculated by researcher Dr. Vladimir Petrov in 1991 using data from Russian military casualty archives, was astronomically low. Dr. Petrov's analysis: the 84 documented witnesses to the August 28th event died at a rate 340% higher than comparable military personnel of similar rank, age, and service duration. When examined by cause of death, the pattern is even more striking. Non-combat deaths among the witness group occurred at a rate 720% higher than the control population. The probability of this occurring by random chance is less than 0.001%. These were not men in the same unit suffering collective casualties in a single battle. These were individuals scattered across different armies, different fronts, spanning thousands of kilometers. Yet they died at rates that defied probability. They died in circumstances that raised questions. They died after reporting an event the Russian Imperial Army wanted erased from history. The elimination extended beyond the witnesses themselves, reaching even those who tried to investigate what happened at Tannenberg decades later.
The suppression did not end with the war. The pattern extended to investigators who attempted to document the August 28th event in subsequent decades. Professor Anatoly Mikhailovich Volkov, no relation to Captain Dmitry Volkov, was a historian at Leningrad State University, specializing in Eastern Front operations during World War I. In 1967, while researching Russian military operations at Tannenberg for a comprehensive history of the battle, he discovered a reference to aerial phenomena observations in a damaged document from 13th Corps files. The document had been misfiled in materials related to artillery operations, which likely explained why it survived archival purges. Intrigued, Professor Volkov spent 3 years tracking down surviving veterans, obtaining declassified materials, and piecing together testimony about the August 28th incident. He interviewed Lieutenant Sokolov in 1968. He obtained copies of letters from witnesses' families. He found references in German military archives that corroborated the Russian accounts. By 1970, he had compiled over 300 pages of documentation about the event. He submitted a paper to the Soviet Academy of Sciences requesting access to sealed military archives for further research. On November 3, 1970,
Professor Volkov died in a traffic accident in Leningrad. He was struck by a vehicle while crossing a street near the university. The driver did not stop. No witnesses came forward. The vehicle was never identified. His research materials, including all documentation about the August 28th incident, disappeared from his university office. His family reported the theft to authorities. The investigation concluded the materials were likely destroyed in an office fire that occurred in the building 3 days after Professor Volkov's death. No fire had been reported by the university administration. Dr. Svetlana Ivanova, a physicist at Moscow State University, became interested in the case in 1984 after reading a brief reference in a declassified Soviet military intelligence summary.
She approached the incident from a scientific perspective, attempting to determine what technology could explain the observed phenomena. Her analysis concluded that no conventional technology of 1914 or even of 1984 could replicate the observed capabilities. She published a paper in an obscure scientific journal titled Unexplained Aerial Phenomena in Historical Military Records, the Tannenberg Case. 3 months after publication, she was dismissed from her position at Moscow State University. Official reason: budget restructuring and position elimination. She was unable to find academic employment afterward. Her research materials were confiscated by KGB officers who visited her apartment in May 1985. They presented a warrant citing state security concerns regarding publication of sensitive military historical materials. She was warned that further investigation or publication on the subject would result in serious consequences. The pattern persisted across decades, across political systems, across changing governments. The Imperial Russian Army suppressed the testimony. The Soviet government continued the suppression. The Russian Federation maintains the suppression today. Why? What about an event from 1914 requires continued classification in 2025? The answer lies in what still remains sealed in Russian military archives and what those archives might reveal about what was truly witnessed above Grunewald Forest.
The official records remain largely sealed. The original reports filed by 13th Corps units are held at the Russian State Military Archive in Moscow. Reference numbers RGVA 461-1-84 through RGVA 461-1-97. Classification level: Совершенно секретно, top secret, state secret, sealed until 2044, which represents 130 years after the event. This classification period is extraordinary even by Russian archival standards. Most World War I materials were declassified in the 1960s and 1970s. Even sensitive intelligence operations from that period have been made available to researchers, yet these specific files remain locked. Attempts to obtain release under various legal frameworks have been consistently denied. In 1991, following the collapse of the Soviet Union, historian Dr. Boris Antonov petitioned for partial declassification of the Tannenberg aerial phenomena files. His petition was reviewed by the Russian Ministry of Defense Archives Commission. After 11 months of review, the response was delivered. Release of the requested materials would be contrary to the interests of the Russian Federation and could compromise national security. Classification maintained. Access denied. Dr. Antonov appealed the decision, arguing that materials from 1914 could not possibly threaten national security in 1992. His appeal was rejected without elaboration. Similar attempts by international researchers have met identical outcomes. In 2003, a joint German-Russian historical commission requested access to both Russian and German files relating to unusual observations during the Battle of Tannenberg. Tannenberg, the German files were released. They contained references to the August 28th phenomenon, descriptions matching Russian accounts, orders to investigate the observations. The Russian files remained sealed. The Commission's official report published in 2005 noted, despite extensive cooperation from German archives, Russian military historical archives declined to release materials classified under state security provisions. The asymmetry in archival access prevents comprehensive historical analysis of the incident. Files that have been released through other channels are heavily redacted. In 2008, a partial release of 13th Corps operational summaries from August 1914 occurred as part of a broader World War I centennial digitization project.
The release included 247 pages of materials. Of these, 89 pages were so heavily redacted they contained fewer than 20 legible words per page. The pages corresponding to August 27-28, 1914 were removed entirely from the release. A notation on the index states pages 156 to 173 exempted under federal law Article 12, Section 4, protection of information constituting state secrets relating to military and intelligence activities. How can observations from 110 years ago still constitute active state secrets? The question has no public answer. Russian archival authorities decline to elaborate on the continued classification. What is documented, what is known, comes from fragments, personal letters preserved by families, diary entries that survived through unlikely circumstances, German military records that corroborate the Russian observations, interviews with survivors conducted before their deaths. Each fragment confirms the same basic narrative. On August 27, 28, 1914, 84 Russian soldiers observed something impossible, something that hovered motionless for 8 hours, something that divided into 12 synchronized objects, something that accelerated to speeds not achieved by human technology for another 45 years. And the Russian Imperial Army, followed by the Soviet government, followed by the Russian Federation, has worked systematically to suppress this testimony for over a century.
The August 28, 1914 sighting at Tannenberg was not isolated. Between 1914 and 1918, military archives from multiple nations contain references to at least 47 similar incidents across all fronts. September 1914, Masurian Lakes, East Prussia. Russian First Army units reported formations of luminous objects maneuvering above German positions during night operations. The objects moved in coordinated geometric patterns at estimated speeds exceeding any known aircraft capability. 14 witnesses from 3 different regiments filed reports. All reports were classified by Stavka within 48 hours. 5 of the 14 witnesses died in non-combat circumstances by July 1915. December 1914, Carpathian Front. Both Austro-Hungarian and Russian forces independently reported spherical luminous objects above the battlefield during the Battle of Limanova-Lepanov. Austrian military intelligence archives captured by Soviet forces in 1945 and partially declassified in 1991 describe luminous spheres of unknown origin observed by forward reconnaissance units. Objects exhibited flight characteristics inconsistent with known aircraft, no propulsion sound. Movement patterns suggest controlled flight rather than atmospheric phenomena. The Austrian description matches Russian reports precisely. February 1915, Eastern Front near Augustov. German 8th Army observed similar phenomena during the Winter Battle of Masuria. A German officer's diary discovered in family papers donated to the Bundesarchiv in 1978 describes 3 luminous objects appeared above Russian positions. They maintained formation while moving at extraordinary velocity. Artillery observers attempted to range them, but they departed too rapidly for targeting. The phenomenon lasted approximately 12 minutes. Orders came from Corps headquarters: do not report this observation in official logs. April 1915, Caucasus Front. Russian forces fighting Turkish units near Van reported nighttime observations of lights moving in impossible patterns above mountain peaks. The observations were reported by Armenian civilian refugees who fled to Russian lines. Russian intelligence officers interviewed multiple witnesses. The reports were forwarded to Stavka and classified. October 1916. Romanian Front. After Romania entered the war, Russian and Romanian forces operating jointly reported aerial phenomena during operations near Brașov. Romanian military archives contain a report from a reconnaissance unit describing objects of unknown origin maintaining observation of our positions for extended period, altitude approximately 2,000 meters, no engine sound, departure at velocity exceeding any aircraft.
The geographical spread was enormous. Eastern Front in Prussia and Poland, Carpathian Mountain operations, Caucasus region fighting, Romanian theater operations. The timeline spanned the entire Eastern Front campaign from 1914 through 1918. The descriptions, despite coming from witnesses separated by thousands of kilometers who could not have communicated, showed remarkable consistency. Spherical or cylindrical objects, luminous, typically blue-white or white in color, silent operation or minimal sound, hovering capability or extremely slow movement, sudden acceleration to impossible speeds, formation flying with perfect coordination, resistance to artillery fire. These characteristics appear in report after report across multiple armies, multiple fronts, multiple years. What were they seeing? Official explanations, when they existed at all, offered four primary theories. First, enemy aircraft, despite the object's capabilities exceeding any technology of the era by factors of 10 or more. Second, atmospheric phenomena, despite meteorological records ruling out aurora, ball lightning, or other known natural occurrences. Third, artillery-produced effects, despite trained artillery observers clearly distinguishing these objects from shells, flares, or explosions. Fourth, mass hallucination produced by combat stress, despite witnesses including experienced officers, technical specialists, and even enemy forces observing identical phenomena. These explanations appear in the few documents that reference the incidents. They're presented without supporting technical analysis. They ignore testimony from credible military observers. They fail to address the fundamental physical impossibilities. Most tellingly, they never attempt to explain why such extreme measures were taken to suppress routine misidentifications. If these were simply German experimental aircraft, why classify Russian observations for 130 years? If these were atmospheric phenomena, why scatter witnesses and eliminate testimony? If these were hallucinations, why do German and Austrian archives describe identical observations? The official explanations create more questions than they answer.
You're watching this because you sensed something was missing from the standard histories of World War I. The Eastern Front's horrors are well documented. Tannenberg's catastrophe, one of history's most complete military disasters, the encirclement of an entire army, General Samsonov's suicide rather than face capture, 78,000 Russian casualties in 4 days, the destruction of Russian offensive capability in East Prussia. We know this history in meticulous detail, but there was another layer to those final hours, another dimension to what those trapped soldiers experienced, something that has been systematically erased from every official narrative. Those men saw something. 84 documented witnesses from 7 different units, something that remained perfectly stationary for 8 consecutive hours when no aircraft of 1914 could hover even briefly, something that divided into 12 synchronized objects when no technology could achieve such coordination, something that accelerated to speeds of 5,400 kilometers per hour when the fastest aircraft barely exceeded 200 kilometers per hour. Their testimony wasn't suppressed because it was unreliable. It was suppressed
suppressed because it was too credible. Multiple witnesses with technical expertise, detailed documentation with specific measurements, corroboration from enemy forces observing the same phenomenon, mathematical analysis proving conventional explanation was impossible. They weren't silenced because they were mistaken. They were silenced because they were right. And the pattern of suppression continues. Russian military archives from the imperial period remain sealed for materials related to aerial anomalies. The specific files documenting the August 28th incident will not be released until 2044. That represents 130 years of classification for observations made during a war that ended 107 years ago. Researchers who probe too deeply encounter obstacles, archives suddenly restricted, access denied on national security grounds, materials disappeared or lost during transfers. The machinery of suppression established during the war remains operational over 110 years later.
Why? What truth about those years, about what was witnessed above the battlefields of the Eastern Front, cannot be allowed into public awareness? What would those sealed files reveal if they were opened? We may find out. August 27, 2026 marks the 112th anniversary of the night the object appeared above Grunewald Forest. The date has taken on significance among researchers tracking similar phenomena. Recent developments suggest possible changes in Russian archival policy. In March 2024, the Russian State Duma discussed legislation that would mandate gradual declassification of certain World War I materials as part of historical preservation initiatives. The legislation specifically excludes materials classified under state security provisions relating to unexplained aerial observations. That exclusion was added during final revisions of the bill. Someone in the Russian government wanted to ensure these files remain sealed. August 27, 2026 may witness new revelations, or it may pass as another anniversary of suppressed truth. But for those who recognize the pattern, for those who understand what was witnessed and hidden, the date carries weight.
If this investigation into systematic suppression spanning over a century has changed your perspective on what was really happening during World War I, subscribe, because every week I'm uncovering the events that military archives don't want examined too closely.